I was sitting in a windowless briefing room at Fort Belvoir, listening to a contractor explain how their financial logs mysteriously disappeared, which was code for, "We deleted them and hope no one notices," when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I ignore everything during a classified briefing. But this buzz wasn't normal. It was the alert from my home security system, the one tied directly to my clearance requirements. The notification read, "Unauthorized entry, primary door." My stomach tightened. I don't get visitors. Nobody in my family drops by unannounced. My neighbors definitely don't. And the maintenance guy only comes when I call him, which is never. So whoever just opened my apartment door either had a key or shouldn't be there at all. I glanced at the colonel leading the briefing. He nodded, the silent handle your business gesture every officer learns. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera feed. The screen loaded in sharp, military-grade clarity. And there she was, my sister Madison, standing right in the middle of my living room like she owned the place. She wasn't confused. She wasn't startled. She wasn't even curious. She looked around with that same "this world exists for me" expression she's had since we were kids, like she was in a store deciding what to take home. "No way," I muttered. She walked straight toward my bedroom. Not a pause. Not even a fake, "Oh wow, look at this cute decor" moment. Just beeline to the most private room in my apartment. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Madison had an emergency key. Not because I gave her one, but because my parents insisted family should always have access. In their defense, the key was meant for actual emergencies. Of course, Madison's definition of emergency has always been flexible. Once, she used a spare key to enter our parents' house because she wanted their blender. She didn't even wash it after using it. I switched to the bedroom camera. Madison walked around like she was checking off items on a grocery list. She went straight to the closet, pushed aside my uniforms, and got to the lockbox bolted into the wall. Not a big mystery how she found it. She'd snooped before. She's not exactly subtle. Then she pulled something from her purse, a lockpick kit. Sure, why not? My sister, the suburban mother of two, with a set of tools she probably bought after watching a 5 Ways to Pick Any Lock video at 2 in the morning. She started working the lock. Not well, but well enough. She fumbled. She reset. She muttered something I couldn't hear. It took her 5 minutes to pop it, but she actually did it. When the lock clicked open, she grinned like she'd just solved national debt. She grabbed the stack of document folders inside each one containing sensitive evidence, serial logs, and federally tracked bait securities worth $500,000. They weren't sitting in my apartment because I thought it was fun. They were there because I was auditing them as part of an active investigation. Everything about them, down to the paper clips, was registered in federal databases. Madison held the folders up to the camera like she was presenting them on a game show, then stuffed them into her oversized purse and walked out without even closing the closet door. My sister cannot be bothered with little details like "put things back where they were" or "don't commit a federal crime on a Thursday afternoon." I stood there in the hallway, staring at my phone like it might suddenly show me an alternate reality where she wasn't an idiot. But no. She'd walked out with $500,000 in bait securities like she'd just borrowed a sweater. There are moments in the military where you feel the difference between emotion and action. You don't get to panic. You don't get to scream. You follow procedure, because procedure is what keeps disasters from turning into catastrophes. So I made the call. I contacted Army CID first. Short, factual, calm. "This is Major Emily Harper, reporting a theft of federal evidence from my residence." Now, there was a beat of silence on the other end before the agent said, "Major Harper, please confirm, evidence currently connected to case 7-492? Yes." Another pause. Longer. "Do not approach your residence. Do not contact the suspect. We're elevating this to DOD, OIG, and FBI counterintelligence immediately." Next, DOD, OIG. Then FBI. Each call was almost identical, and each one carried the same undertone. "This is extremely bad, and your sister has no idea what she just touched." CID sent me a message. "We're already tracking the serials. The moment anyone verifies or moves them, we get a hit." Which, frankly, meant Madison's phone was about to become her worst enemy. I walked back into the briefing room and took my seat, but I barely heard the contractor rambling about temporary data misplacement. My mind was stuck on Madison walking around my apartment like she was on a treasure hunt. The way she picked the lock. The way she casually took evidence tied to a federal sting operation. The way she probably convinced herself she had some moral right to it because family. Family is funny like that. They can love you and still think your life is a suggestion. They can be proud of you and still assume your work isn't real. They can cheer for you and still treat your boundaries like optional guidelines. My family had spent years pretending my job was some cute government thing with paperwork and maybe a badge. Despite the fact that clearance agents visited my neighbors regularly. Despite the fact that I'd spent years deployed overseas. Despite the fact that I lived 30 minutes from the Pentagon and worked out of a building with more antennas than windows. Madison once asked me if the Army let me take snacks home from base. That's the level of insight she has into my life. So of course she assumed the folders in my lockbox were old paperwork. Something she could convert into quick money. Something she deserved more than I did. But what she had taken wasn't money. It wasn't even cashable bonds. It was federal evidence. Tagged, logged, serialized, monitored. Evidence connected to a sting operation targeting a contractor laundering money through shell companies overseas. Madison couldn't have picked a worse stack of papers to steal if she tried. My phone buzzed again. CID confirming that the system had already flagged the Securities as removed from authorized custody. They were officially in the wild, which meant every federal agency with access now knew something had gone wrong. One of the analysts texted me, "Major, who the hell took your evidence?" I stared at the screen for a long second before replying. "My sister. I didn't add anything else. That was enough." CID sent one final message. "We'll brief you once she makes her next move." And she would. Madison can't resist showing off. She can't resist sharing. She can't resist telling people she found something valuable. She has never quietly taken anything in her life. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned my attention forward again, letting the noise of the room fade into the background while I waited for the inevitable ping from the federal tracking system telling me exactly what she'd decided to do next. I kept my eyes on the briefing slide in front of me, but my mind was running through every protocol I'd ever followed. The kind of mental checklist you do without thinking because muscle memory has saved more lives than luck ever will. My phone buzzed again with another encrypted alert from CID, and the vibration cut straight through my focus. The message said they'd already opened a case file with my name attached, which wasn't a surprise. Anytime evidence walks out of someone's custody, even unintentionally, the chain of responsibility becomes the entire government's problem. And right now, I was the link that snapped. I sat up straighter, adjusted my badge, and forced my breathing into the slow, steady rhythm I'd learned downrange. People imagine combat trains you to run toward explosions. It actually trains you to think clearly when everything around you is falling apart. That's what the Army pays us for. Not courage, not glory, clarity. By the time the briefing wrapped, I had already mapped out every step I needed to follow. I walked straight to the sensitive compartmented information facility office and checked in with the duty officer to log the theft on record. He scanned my ID, checked my clearance, then looked at me with the kind of expression people save for tornado warnings. I didn't explain anything. He didn't ask. Some situations don't need extra dialogue. The moment I stepped out of the building, the cold air hit me hard enough to feel like a slap. I pulled my coat tighter and headed toward the parking lot, trying to work out how my sister, my actual blood relative, had managed to commit a federal offense before lunch. Madison had a talent for being dramatic, but this was a performance even she'd never attempted. Driving out of Fort Belvoir, I kept one hand on the wheel and another on the phone mounted on the dash as new messages came in. CID updated me with a list of what Madison had taken. Serialized bait securities used to track shell companies, copies of financial agreements linked to the contractor under investigation, and a verification packet meant for cross-checking wire transfers. All logged, scanned, and monitored by half a dozen federal systems. She couldn't have picked a worse collection of documents if she'd spun a wheel labeled, "Things that guarantee prison." No. As the highway opened up, I felt the first real spike of anger hit. Not panic, not fear, just anger sharp, measured, and annoyingly rational. I wasn't angry because she'd taken the documents. I was angry because she didn't even understand what she'd taken. The situation wasn't dangerous because she was clever. It was dangerous because she wasn't. People always assume intelligence officers deal with spies. Most of the time, we deal with carelessness. Contractors hiding money. Soldiers posting things online they shouldn't. Relatives rummaging through places they don't belong because family. My phone lit up with a call from my commanding officer, Colonel Reeves. His voice was steady, but I heard the tension underneath it. Major Harper, CID briefed me on the theft. You need to stay available and keep your movements documented. Yes, sir. You followed protocol. That's all that matters right now. He hung up before I could answer. Reeves wasn't rude, he was direct. It's the language of people who don't have time to sugarcoat anything. On the drive toward Arlington, memories of Madison slipped in without permission. Not sentimental ones, annoying ones. Like the time she borrowed my car in high school because hers was dirty. Or the time she took my debit card because she didn't want to bother mom. Or the time she took credit for a volunteer project I organized and smiled at me when our parents congratulated her. If entitlement was an Olympic sport, she'd have a wall full of gold medals. But none of those things came close to this. She'd broken into a federal officer's home and stolen documents tracked by multiple agencies. It wasn't impulsive. She'd brought lockpicks. She'd used an app to break into my keypad safe. She'd searched the closet instead of wandering around aimlessly. That meant she had planned it, rehearsed it, maybe even discussed it with someone. And she had no idea she was walking around holding $500,000 in bait securities. If she tried to cash them, the system would alert federal investigators instantly. If she tried to post them, hand them off, or even show them to her husband's shady financial advisor, she'd light up half the East Coast's monitoring network, like a Christmas tree. Another alert popped up. Tracking triggered. Suspect phone geolocation active. Madison had already pulled the documents out of her purse somewhere. Probably to brag, probably to show someone, probably to get validation. I tightened my grip on the wheel and took the exit toward my apartment. Not to confront her, I wasn't allowed anywhere near her, but to meet with the first responding CID team. They were already stationed in unmarked cars nearby, prepping statements and preliminary logs. Walking into my building, I flashed my ID to the military liaison assigned to intercept me. He nodded, escorted me to my apartment, and let me in. I immediately noticed Madison's fingerprints all over the place, figuratively and literally. My closet door was open, my safe was misaligned from being forced, and my bedroom smelled faintly like her perfume. She always used too much, the kind that announces a person before they enter a room. A CID agent walked through the space, taking photos, dusting surfaces, documenting every point of contact. He pointed at the safe. She used a cheap lockpick set. Not impressive, but she got it open. We've seen worse. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to laugh or apologize for the situation. Neither felt appropriate. He took a few more photos, then said, "Major, we're actively tracking the Securities. They pinged a device tied to a phone number we believe belongs to a financial advisor your sister contacted. We're pulling records now." I looked at him. She contacted a financial advisor already? Looks like it. The moment he tries to verify the documents, the system will alert Treasury OIG. It's only a matter of time. That part, at least, didn't surprise me. Madison has never made a private decision in her life. She has to involve other people. She needs validation like most people need oxygen. The agent closed the evidence box and straightened up. "We'll brief you as soon as the audit team finishes. For now, maintain your schedule. Don't contact the suspect. Don't approach family. Don't deviate from protocol." Understood. As he walked out, I stood alone in my apartment, staring at the open closet and the small empty space where the bait securities should have been. It was strange how something so important could leave behind a void so small. A few inches of missing paper, and the weight of a federal investigation pressing down on every piece of my career. My phone buzzed again. Another update from CID. The Securities had pinged twice. 2 different locations. Madison was moving, showing, sharing. Of course she was. I exhaled, steady and controlled, letting the military calm settle in. No panic, no spiraling, just clarity. She would make another move, and when she did, the system would catch it. It always does. The federal government isn't fast, but it is thorough. And Madison had just stepped into a world she didn't even know existed. I leaned against the doorframe of my bedroom, letting the quiet settle around me the way it always does after CID leaves. The kind of quiet that makes every memory a little too loud. Standing there, staring at the empty shelf where the folders used to be, I felt this familiar pull in my chest. The one that shows up every time Madison does something reckless, and my parents act like she tripped over a rug instead of making an actual choice. It's funny how your brain sorts things when you're stressed. Mine goes straight to history, not because I want it to, but because the past has a way of explaining the present better than any investigation report. I remembered being 13, sitting at the dinner table after winning a statewide science competition. I'd spent weeks building that project, cutting balsa wood until my fingers cramped, running calculations after school while Madison complained about math homework. I came home with a trophy the size of my forearm. Mom took one photo, stuck it on the fridge for a week, then replaced it with one of Madison in a sparkly dress at a school dance. People get bored of academic stuff, she'd said. A pretty picture is nicer to look at. That pattern never changed. Madison broke curfew. I was told to stop micromanaging her. Madison stole my clothes. I was told to share more. Madison screamed at me for not giving her a ride to prom. I ended up grounded for picking a fight. And when I got accepted into West Point, the first thing Dad said wasn't congratulations. It was, "Are you sure that's safe?" Meanwhile, Madison got a job at a boutique and my parents acted like she'd become CEO of a Fortune 500 company. None of this surprised me anymore. But watching her break into my apartment and take federal evidence like she was borrowing nail polish, it brought back every tiny moment where she'd been taught she could take something of mine and nothing bad would happen. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a bottle of water. My nerves weren't shaking, training takes care of that, but I could feel the weight in my shoulders like an old deployment ruck. My phone buzzed again, another alert from CID, confirming movement on the Securities. I set the phone face down on the counter and took a slow breath. Madison was probably out there bragging, waving the folders around like she'd found buried treasure. And the saddest part? She genuinely believed she had a right to whatever she found in my home. I thought about the time she borrowed my laptop without asking and managed to download malware that shut down half my files. Dad laughed it off. She didn't mean to. You should have had better antivirus. Or the night she used my emergency savings to buy a designer bag because Emily never spends money anyway. Instead of making her return it, Mom told me to be grateful you can help your sister. That comment stuck with me for years. I was 22, working 2 jobs while waiting for my military paperwork to clear. Madison wasn't struggling. She just didn't want to use her own money. And somehow, that became my responsibility. I curled my fingers around the bottle, grounding myself. There was no point letting old memories stir things up. But the truth is, this wasn't a sudden escalation. It was the natural endpoint of decades of excuses, favoritism, and everyone pretending the rules didn't apply to Madison because she was the baby. No one likes hearing that a thief doesn't become a thief overnight. They're raised into it. Another alert, this time from Treasury's automated system. Someone had tried to run a quick online valuation of the securities. Not enough to trigger a full verification, but enough to flag interest. I imagined Madison sitting in her SUV, holding the documents up to her phone camera, asking some barely qualified dude named Trevor if he thought they were worth anything. She always liked people named Trevor. They usually had a boat or an ego, sometimes both. I finished the water and set the bottle down. The edges of these memories weren't painful. They were factual, clean, sharp. Years of family dynamics forming a line straight to my apartment door today. The same pattern, new stakes. My parents always said I was too serious, which was their polite way of saying I didn't let Madison walk all over me. They used to joke that the army didn't change me. It just gave me rules to match my personality. Maybe they were right. Structure never bothered me. Expectations were clear. Consequences were consistent. Unlike at home, where consequences depended on who cried first. I walked into the living room and sat down, letting the leather couch cool under me. My mind drifted to the last holiday we all spent together. Madison complained that her husband didn't make enough money. My mom told her she deserved a man who could keep up with her needs. Meanwhile, I'd just gotten back from a deployment and was still adjusting to the idea of not hearing explosions at night. No one asked how I was doing. Madison talked about spa packages for 30 minutes straight. At one point, Dad leaned over to me and whispered, "Don't be jealous. She just turned out more social than you." Jealous was the last thing I felt. Exhaustion was more accurate. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an old friend from Afghanistan, now working with a contractor. He'd heard about the flagged securities and wrote, "Harper, what the hell happened over there? You good?" I stared at the message for a second before replying with a simple, "Fine." There was no way to explain that my sister had just stepped into a federal investigation like she was stepping into a puddle. The truth is, I'd spent my whole life keeping my world separate from my family because they never really tried to understand it. They didn't know what counterintelligence officers did. They didn't understand clearance levels. They didn't know that when agents interviewed my neighbors every few years, it wasn't a friendly visit. They had no idea how many hours I'd spent tracing laundering routes, identifying fake invoices, matching serials to wire transfers. And they didn't care. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't Madison. My parents always said Madison had a big heart and I had a good head. I'm not sure either assessment was accurate. Madison's heart was big when it benefited her. Mine was fine until someone gave me a lockbox and a duty roster. I checked the time. Less than 2 hours had passed since the theft. In that short window, CID had run multiple logs, Treasury networks had flagged movement, and the FBI had initiated a preliminary review. Meanwhile, Madison was out there treating federal bait securities like she'd found coupons in my purse. I stood up again, letting the quiet of the apartment settle into something steadier. The past didn't excuse anything she'd done. It didn't lessen the weight of what was coming. It didn't soften the fact that she had crossed a line no amount of family history could blur. Every step she took now was being tracked, logged, and connected to a network of systems that don't care about sibling dynamics or hurt feelings. They care about breaches, motives, and outcomes. And as the notifications kept rolling in, it became clearer that Madison had taken something far heavier than paper. She'd taken the last piece of distance between our lives, the line I'd kept intact for years, and walked right over it without hesitation. Stepping out of my apartment again, I locked the door behind me and felt the weight of the deadbolt click, the kind of small sound that usually means nothing but today landed heavier than it should. My badge hung from my neck, still warm from being handled by every CID agent who'd walked through the place. I didn't bother heading back inside. I had to drive straight to Fort Belvoir for the formal interview. That was the next unavoidable step, and ignoring it wasn't an option, unless I suddenly wanted to make my sister look responsible by comparison. The drive back felt shorter than before, probably because my mind wouldn't stay still. Every traffic light looked too slow. Every brake tap felt like it stole seconds I couldn't afford. By the time I reached the CID building, the familiar exterior felt different. It's funny how fast a place shifts when you're walking in as a subject instead of an investigator. The agent at the desk scanned my ID, glanced at the monitor, and his brows rose for just a second. That's all it ever takes for recognition to land. "Major Harper, they're waiting for you," he said in the tone people reserve for hurricane warnings and uncomfortable church announcements. I nodded and followed him down the hallway to interview room 3. I'd been inside these rooms dozens of times, but always on the opposite side of the table, on the side with the clipboard, on the side asking the questions, on the side with authority. Today wasn't that day. The CID investigator assigned to my case, Special Agent Logan, greeted me with a firm nod. He was calm, methodical, and looked like he had memorized every regulation ever written just for fun. A second agent, Ramirez, typed on a laptop in the corner, ready to record every word. I sat down, hands on the table, posture straight. My training made it impossible to sit any other way. Logan clicked the recorder. "Major Harper, this is a standard preliminary interview regarding evidence removed from your custody. You are not under investigation at this time, but you are required to answer truthfully under UCMJ, Article 107. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. He asked me to recount everything from the moment my phone buzzed in the briefing room. I gave him the timeline cleanly, without hesitation. Facts only. No speculation, no emotions. My voice sounded calm even to my own ears, which was nice because internally I felt like I was narrating someone else's disaster. Logan nodded occasionally but didn't interrupt until I finished. "Major, the video shows your sister using a lockpick kit," he said. "Was that expected behavior?" I wasn't sure how to answer that in a way that didn't sound like a psychological evaluation of my entire childhood. "Not expected," I said carefully, "but not surprising. She's impulsive." Ramirez snorted quietly. Logan shot him a look, then continued. "Your sister bypassed a keypad safe using an app. Did she have any knowledge of your work or the nature of the documents?" "No." Logan paused. "Did you ever give her access to your residence outside of the emergency key?" "No." "And the documents she took, were they stored according to regulation?" "Yes." "And logged?" "Yes." And in active use? Yes. He leaned back, lacing his fingers. Then you followed protocol. This will be noted. That was the closest thing to relief I'd felt since the alarm went off, but it didn't last long. Logan slid a file across the table, printed screenshots of Madison's recent Google searches. How to open military lockbox. How to pick lock easy. Safe keypad hack app free. What is government security bond? How to cash security bond without ID. Federal documents worth money. And the one that made my jaw tighten. Can family take inheritance early? I didn't react. I just let the pages sit between us like they were made of glass. Logan's voice stayed even. We also subpoenaed her recent purchases. She ordered a lockpick set and a keypad override tool from an online retailer 2 weeks ago. Both were delivered. Tracking matched. The planning was undeniable. Madison hadn't stumbled into a bad decision. She had prepared. Additionally, he continued, the Securities pinged a second location. She showed them to someone. That didn't surprise me. I imagined Madison holding the papers up proudly to whoever she thought would be impressed. She always needed an audience. Then Logan looked at me in the way investigators do when they're trying to measure the emotional temperature of a person. Major Harper, do you feel your sister intended to steal from you personally? Or do you believe she misunderstood the value of what she took? I thought about that question. Really thought about it. The answer wasn't complicated, but it wasn't simple either. She didn't understand the documents, I said, but she understood they weren't hers. Line. Logan nodded slowly, as if that confirmed a box he'd already checked. Ramirez typed it down without looking up. The questioning continued every detail about the safe, the storage logs, the key, the cameras, the timeline. It was repetitive but necessary, thorough. Exhausting in the way only procedural accuracy can be. After nearly an hour, Logan closed his folder. Major, you are temporarily suspended from handling classified materials until we complete our report. This is standard. Your chain of command will be notified. I understand. You didn't do anything wrong, he added, tone softening by a degree. You reported the theft immediately. Your actions protected the investigation. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because praise felt irrelevant with the knot still tightening in my chest. Walking out of the CID office, I saw 2 officers I knew standing near the hallway, talking in low voices. They stopped when they saw me. It wasn't dramatic, they didn't whisper or stare, but the silence was enough. The kind that tells you people know something happened even if they don't know what. And in a place where gossip moves faster than email, the silence hit louder than any words. I headed outside, letting the cold air wash over me again. My phone buzzed another update. Treasury flagged a near verification attempt. Someone had tried to check the Securities' legitimacy and backed out halfway. Madison was poking a bear she didn't understand. I stood there on the steps for a moment, breathing steadily, letting the reality settle deeper. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the blunt, practical way soldiers absorb bad news. By accepting it, evaluating it, and preparing for the next move. There was no dramatic turn to brace for, no sudden shift. Just the steady grind of a situation tightening around itself, pulling every loose thread into something sharper and heavier. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and checked the newest alert again, the numbers glowing against the dim dashboard. Madison had set a chain of systems into motion that wouldn't slow down for anyone, not even her. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I pulled out of the CID lot, the dashboard lights reflecting across the windshield, while the reality of the situation settled into something sharper. I didn't rush. I didn't speed. I just let the car move, steady and controlled, toward Richmond, where my parents had decided we were all having a family dinner, unaware that one of their daughters had just wandered into a federal crime like it was a garage sale. By the time I hit the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the rows of spotless lawns. Everything here looked peaceful, predictable, exactly the way Madison liked to pretend her life was. Branches swayed lightly over the driveway as I parked behind my father's truck. My parents' house always looked like a postcard someone forgot to throw away, too perfect for what actually happened inside. I stepped onto the porch and could already hear voices inside, cheerful and oblivious. I rang the bell out of habit, even though I still had a key. Mom swung the door open with her usual enthusiasm, the kind she reserved exclusively for Madison and tolerated for me. "Oh, honey, you made it," she said, pulling me in like nothing in the universe could possibly be wrong. The smell of roast chicken and garlic bread hit me. warm and nostalgic in a way that almost annoyed me. My father was carving the roast at the table, and my aunt and uncle were chatting while passing salad bowls back and forth. Then Madison walked in from the kitchen, smiling like someone who just returned from a spa weekend, not a breaking and entering session. "There she is," she said, raising her wine glass. "Our family hero." I didn't respond. I took a seat at the opposite end of the table. Not far but not close. Enough space to breathe. Madison plopped into the chair beside her husband Kyle, who was scrolling through his phone. He gave me a polite nod, the kind people give to someone they don't dislike but definitely don't understand. Dinner started with the usual small talk, my uncle bragging about golf scores, my mom asking if anyone wanted more bread, my father talking about the new grill he bought for no reason other than it being on sale. It was painfully normal. Too normal. The kind of normal that cracked at the seams the minute Madison cleared her throat like she was about to accept an award. "So," she said, dramatically placing her wine glass down, "I made a huge financial move today." That. Of course she opened with that. She always had a taste for spotlight she never earned. Mom lit up instantly. "Oh? What did you do, sweetheart?" Madison reached into her oversized purse, the same one I watched her stuff stolen federal evidence into, and pulled out my folders, placing them on the table, like she'd brought dessert. Kyle raised a brow. "You're showing everyone now?" Madison grinned. "Why not? We're with family." "No." I kept my expression still, but inside I felt something lock into place, like the moment before a pressure cooker releases steam. Madison flipped open the top folder, holding it up between two fingers. "Look what I found at Emily's place," she announced proudly. "Can you believe she just left these sitting there? They're some kind of government bonds or something. The advisor said they could be worth a fortune." The table reacted exactly as I knew they would. My mother gasped. "Oh my goodness, Madison, that's wonderful." My father smiled like someone who'd just discovered oil in his backyard. "You're always thinking ahead. Good for you." My aunt clapped. My uncle nodded approvingly. Every single one of them looked delighted by the sight of $500,000 in bait securities that didn't belong to Madison, weren't hers to touch, and definitely weren't bonds you could just cash. I let them have their moment, their applause, their pride. Let the room soak in its own ignorance. Then I spoke, calm and level. "Put those down." The entire table went silent. It wasn't loud, but it cut straight through their excitement like someone flipped a switch. Madison laughed a little too loudly. "Relax, Emily. Seriously. You weren't using them." And the advisor said, "They're not bonds," I said. "They're federal securities tied to an active investigation." She blinked, confused for 1 second before rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. Don't start with your scary government talk. This is a family dinner." "They're evidence," I continued, "and you stole them." Mom looked horrified, but not for the right reason. "Emily, that's a terrible thing to say to your sister." "She broke into my apartment," I said, keeping my tone even. "Picked my lock, broke into my safe, took those. That's theft of federal property." Dad set the carving knife down, frowning at me. "Emily, you need to calm down. Your sister didn't steal anything. Families share. That's what we do." "No," I said. "That's what you let her do." Madison scoffed. "God, you're so dramatic. They were just sitting there. And Mom's birthday is still your safe code. Anyone could have opened it. Honestly, that's your fault." "Madison," I said, "those documents are serialized and tracked by the Department of Defense. They are part of a sting operation. Every time you move them, they ping a federal system. Now." She opened her mouth to argue again, but the sound of the doorbell cut her off. It didn't ring politely. It hammered the house. 3 sharp hits. Then a 4th. Dad stood, confused. "Who on earth?" A voice boomed from outside. "Federal agents, open the door." My mother went pale, my uncle froze. Kyle's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. Madison's face drained of color, her confidence evaporating in real time. "Emily, what did you do?" I didn't bother answering because the door crashed open before anyone could decide whether to move or stay seated. Army CID stepped through first, followed by 2 FBI agents and a deputy marshal. Their vests were marked. Their expressions were focused. Their presence filled the dining room like a cold front sweeping through a warm day. Agent Logan was the first to speak. "Madison Harper, you are in possession of stolen federal property. Step away from the table." "No." Madison's chair scraped backward. "Wait, no, this is a misunderstanding. Emily's exaggerating. It's family stuff, that's all. Logan didn't blink. The items on the table are federal bait securities. You attempted to verify them earlier today. You bypassed a secure safe to obtain them. You are under arrest. When he reached for her wrist, she whipped around to face me, eyes wide, betrayal sharp in her voice. How could you let them do this to me? But the truth was sitting right there in front of her, inside a stack of folders she never should have touched. She'd done it to herself. Logan secured the cuffs, read her rights clearly, professionally, and motioned for the agents to escort her out. My father sputtered. Mother sobbed. Kyle stared at the table like it had personally attacked him. And the agents moved with precision, guiding Madison toward the door while her voice shook, pleading with anyone who would listen. They left the front door open behind them, the cold air pushing into the dining room as footsteps faded down the walkway. The cold air spilling through the open doorway brushed across my arms as the agents guided Madison down the steps, her protests echoing across the front yard. I didn't move. No one at the table moved. It felt like the entire room had been hit by a flashbang, no sound, no breath, just frozen shock. My mother finally broke the silence with a thin, shaking whisper. This can't be happening. But it was happening exactly the way it had to happen when someone steals federally tracked evidence and waves it around like a clearance badge. Agent Logan stepped back inside, retrieving the folders from the table. He handled them like fragile glass, sliding each one into an evidence bag, sealing them, labeling them. The room stayed painfully quiet. Even the roast chicken smell seemed to vanish, replaced by the sterile hint of the plastic bags clicking shut. My father found his voice first. Sir, this is a mistake. My daughter isn't a criminal. Logan looked at him with the kind of neutrality only federal investigators can master. Sir, the documents your daughter took are part of an active federal investigation. They are serialized, monitored, and logged. She removed them from a secured safe without authorization, attempted to verify them, and intended to cache them. Those are federal offenses. Dad shook his head like that explanation was personally offensive. She didn't know. She's a good girl. She wouldn't. She bypassed a lock, Logan said plainly. She used a keypad override app. She used a lockpick set. She researched methods for 2 weeks. That is preparation, not confusion. My dad's mouth opened, closed, then opened again with nothing coming out. Madison had always relied on crying or excuses or charm to get her way. She had no idea how to handle logic. Kyle finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Is she going to prison? Logan didn't soften. This isn't a traffic ticket, sir. My aunt covered her mouth. My uncle stared at the evidence bags like they were alive. My mother reached for me, hand trembling. Emily, please, do something. Tell them you'll drop the charges. I stared at her. It wasn't anger, just disbelief at how deeply she misunderstood the world I lived in. I don't control federal charges, I said. These aren't my papers. They belong to the Department of Defense. This isn't a family dispute. It's a federal crime. Mom's eyes filled with tears. But she's your sister. She's also an adult, I said. And she broke into my home and stole federal property. If I hadn't reported it, I'd be the one under investigation right now. Dad jabbed a finger at me. You shouldn't have called the authorities. You could have talked to her first. Dad, the minute she walked out with those documents, the system flagged them. Even if I'd never said a word, agents would have landed at her door anyway. That's ridiculous, he snapped. Logan answered before I had to. Sir, the securities were configured to alert multiple agencies upon unauthorized movement. The alert went out the moment she left the residence. This situation is not something your daughter caused accidentally. And it is not something your other daughter could have concealed. Mom sank into her chair, hands covering her face. Kyle rubbed the back of his neck. Madison told me she found old bonds in your safe. She said you probably forgot you had them. Ma? I didn't bother asking why he believed her. That was his problem to unpack on his own time. Agent Ramirez re-entered the doorway. Vehicle's secure. She's being transported to the field office. Logan nodded, zipped the final evidence bag, and handed me a card. Major Harper, you'll be contacted for a formal statement. We'll need you at the field office at 09000 tomorrow. I took the card with steady fingers. Not because I wasn't affected, but because the military trains that reaction into you. Stand firm, keep breathing, anchor yourself in the moment. As the agents left, the house seemed to deflate. The warmth drained from the room, the hum of conversations from earlier had died completely. A fork dropped somewhere near the center of the table, loud enough to make my uncle jump. Finally, my father spoke again, voice low and angry. "You ruined this family." A statement so familiar it felt rehearsed. I didn't flinch. "Madison did that herself." "She's your sister," he repeated, louder this time. "Family protects family." "Family doesn't steal federal evidence," I said. Mom wiped her eyes. "You could have protected her." "You always choose the army over your own blood." "I choose integrity," I said, something she didn't. My aunt cleared her throat like she was trying to break the tension. "Maybe this will all be sorted out soon. Maybe they'll drop it." No one answered her. Even she didn't sound convinced. The front door creaked as Kyle slipped outside, maybe to follow the agents, maybe to think in peace. The rest of us remained seated in the thick, uncomfortable aftermath. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize the daughter he raised. My mother stared at the tablecloth as if it had personally betrayed her. My aunt and uncle kept glancing between me and the door, clearly wishing they'd chosen a different night to visit. I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, and all eyes jumped toward me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the same weight I'd grown up under whenever anything went wrong and someone needed a person to blame. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain anything further. There was no reason to. Federal agents had walked through a dining room tonight. Evidence had been bagged on the dinner table. A woman had been cuffed in front of her children's grandparents. None of that could be smoothed over with family logic. I headed toward the door, grabbing my coat on the way out. When I stepped onto the porch, the air felt clearer, colder, grounded in the kind of reality my family refused to accept. Their voices muffled behind the walls, arguments already starting to form. As I walked to my car, porch lights flickering behind me, I couldn't help noticing how quiet the neighborhood was, how still everything looked compared to the chaos unfolding inside that perfectly maintained house. The cruiser holding Madison was already gone. The agents' vehicles had vanished. The street looked normal again, like nothing had happened at all. The only difference was the hollow space where the Harper family version of "everything's fine" used to be. I unlocked my car, slid inside, and sat for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the engine's low hum settle into the silence around me. The engine's low vibration steadied my hands as I sat there, letting the cold settle through the windshield and into the cabin. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't check my phone. I just breathed, feeling the night cool my skin while every noise from my parents' house faded into nothing. When I finally shifted into drive, my mind had already slipped into the place it always went when things got complicated, the place that sorted facts from noise, action from emotion. The road back toward Fort Belvoir stretched quiet and dark, but clarity came easier now, not the emotional kind, the tactical kind. The kind that shows up when you have no room left to pretend your life is something simpler than it is. Halfway down the highway, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen, another alert from Treasury's internal network. A new log showed that the securities Madison had taken were officially entered into the active theft database, tagged with unauthorized movement, verified. That meant every agency connected to that system from the FBI to the DOJ to the Pentagon was now synced up. The chain reaction had widened. I didn't need the phone to tell me what I already knew. Madison's little adventure had escalated into something irreversible long before the agents walked through my parents' door. I drove straight to the office instead of home. My keycard beeped at the secure entrance, and I stepped into the familiar fluorescent quiet, the one place where chaos had rules and every decision had a paper trail. I headed to my desk in the operations room, logged in, and pulled up the internal case file linked to my credentials. A thick stream of updates filled the screen. Movement logs, evidence uploads, search history data, financial advisor reports, her vehicle trackers pinging locations she'd driven to, her phone metadata being processed, witness lists forming. It was surreal watching my sister's name appear in places reserved for cartel accountants and international scammers. She didn't belong here, not because she was innocent, but because she was too small-minded to understand how big the system she had poked really was. I clicked open the forensic file containing the footage from my apartment, my own submission from earlier. The video opened in the upper corner. Madison stepping inside, lockpick kit in her hand. Kneeling at the safe. The screen brightened when the keypad lit up, her face glowing with the kind of determination she usually reserved for getting front-row seats at a concert. Her movements weren't rushed or clumsy. She looked focused, steady. That detail hit harder than I expected. She hadn't fumbled her way through some impulsive mistake. She moved like someone who thought she deserved the outcome she was chasing. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I'd seen hundreds of break-ins during my career. Some sloppy, some strangely inventive, some heartbreaking, but watching your own sibling calmly violate your space was a category all its own. Another file auto-opened, forensic notes from the team analyzing Madison's online activity. A wall of timestamps and search terms filled the screen. I skimmed them, jaw tightening a little. How to open locked office door without damage. Safest way to crack keypad safe. Is it illegal to take family members' stuff? Can you cash us securities at a bank? Do old treasury bonds expire? Are bearer securities valuable? How to hide money from government? And then, how much trouble for taking something not yours? The answer to that was unfolding in real time. I switched folders and opened her recent communications. The ones recovered from her phone showed a pattern that wasn't new to me but landed differently now. Messages to her husband. Emily never uses anything she has. She won't even miss it. She keeps weird stuff in her house. Government junk. Probably worthless. The advisor better be right. We could really use this. Don't tell her. She'll freak out about something small again. Small. She'd called $500,000 in Bates Securities small. Another message she'd sent to her friend. Emily acts like she's some big-shot soldier, but she still uses Mom's birthday as her passwords. Honestly, she's lucky I'm helping her. Helping me. Right. I kept scrolling, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because evidence mattered, facts mattered, and facts don't get softer if you avoid them. Then I opened the report from the financial advisor she'd met earlier. His notes were painfully thorough, probably because he knew he'd stumbled onto something radioactive. Client presented 3 federal bearer instruments, possibly active. Client requested expedited cash out with no verification process. Client refused to answer chain of ownership questions. Client expressed urgency but had limited knowledge of securities. Filed suspicious activity report immediately. He had flagged it within minutes. The system had flagged it again. Treasury flagged it. CID flagged it. The advisor flagged it. Everyone except the one person who should have known better. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and let the screen blur for a second. My whole life, Madison had acted like consequences were suggestions, like rules were optional, like responsibility was this unnecessary accessory other people wore. And every time she messed up, there had been someone there to soften the fallout. Our parents, teachers, friends, even strangers who found her charming enough to forgive anything. Tonight was the first time in her life that the world didn't bend around her. A soft knock on my cubicle wall pulled me out of the thoughts. It was Major Crandall, my deputy supervisor. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity, wasn't judgment, just a quiet understanding. He'd been in the army long enough to recognize the gravity of situations that have nothing to do with war, but still hit like shrapnel. "You holding up?" he asked. "I'm working," I said. That wasn't the question. I paused for a beat. "I'm fine." Crandall nodded the way people do when they know you're lying, but respect you enough not to push. He lowered his voice. "Harper, this is going to move fast. The system doesn't stall for personal ties." His tone stayed pragmatic. "We're not treating you like you've done anything wrong. You followed protocol. You did everything by the book. No one's going to hold you responsible for her decisions." "I know." "Good." He tapped the edge of my desk once, a steadying gesture, then left me to the glow of the monitors. Once he was gone, I stared at the evidence logs again, at the digital footprint of my sister's actions. None of this felt dramatic. None of it was cinematic. It was banally predictable in the way only real-life bad decisions can be. People think federal crimes look like movies, high-tech theft, international intrigue, elaborate plots. But the truth? Half the time, it's someone making a stupid, selfish choice and assuming the world will clean it up for them. I closed the last file, logged out, and shut off the monitor. The room dimmed to the soft hum of distant servers. I stood, letting the weight shift off my spine, and walked toward the exit, the hallway lights buzzing faintly overhead. The truth behind the stolen securities wasn't complicated. Madison hadn't uncovered a secret. She hadn't been targeted. She hadn't been tricked. She hadn't been desperate. She had simply believed that my life, my work, my clearance, my responsibilities didn't matter enough to take seriously. And the systems built to protect this country didn't care whether she understood any of it. They only cared that she crossed a line she couldn't undo. Walking into the federal courthouse that first morning felt strangely similar to walking into a deployment briefing, same stiff air, same knot settling low in my chest, same awareness that nothing inside those walls was going to be pleasant. I didn't dress up. I wore a plain navy suit, hair pulled back, badge clipped inside my jacket. No uniform, no ribbons, no rank, just me, stepping into a situation that would stretch out for months and drag every uncomfortable truth into daylight. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed quietly with attorneys, clerks, and defendants shuffling through like it was routine business. Maybe it was for them. For me, it felt like watching my family balanced on a knife's edge. Madison arrived surrounded by her attorney, wearing a beige sweater that looked intentionally soft, like she wanted the jury to see her as delicate and harmless. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. Kyle walked behind her, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like a man who'd spent weeks sleeping on a couch and considering better life choices. My parents sat on one of the benches, stiff as mannequins. Mom's eyes were already red. Dad's jaw pulsed in that familiar way he had when the world didn't match his expectations. The moment they saw me, Mom reached out. "Honey, please tell them you don't want this." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to tell anyone. The process was in motion, bigger than all of us. Inside the courtroom, the judge took his seat, the attorneys shuffled their papers, and the jury filed in. I sat at a reserved table behind the prosecution, not because I was choosing sides, but because I was part of the case. That fact alone made everything heavier. The government opened with a clear, steady explanation of the charges: organized, unemotional, factual. The defendant unlawfully accessed a secured residence. She bypassed a locked office door. She cracked an electronic safe. She removed 3 serialized federal securities. She attempted to cache them. She attempted to conceal the origin of said securities. She conducted deliberate research on methods to commit these acts. There was no dramatic flair, no raised voices, no finger-pointing, just facts. Madison's attorney countered with a story so sugar-coated it practically dripped off the table. My client is a wife, a mother, a community volunteer. She believed her sister had left behind old family documents. She had no intention of committing a crime. She misunderstood. She made a mistake. A mistake that involved a lockpick set, a keypad override tool, and 2 weeks of Google searches. Sure, witness after witness came forward. A Treasury analyst explained how the securities were being monitored. A forensic tech walked the jury through Madison's search history. The financial advisor testified about her attempt to bypass verification protocols. The CID agent described her break-in with a clinical precision that made Madison shrink in her seat. The worst part was the security footage from my apartment. Watching it again on that large courtroom screen, with strangers taking notes and jurors leaning forward, felt like exposing my private life to an audience that didn't deserve to be there. But the footage didn't care. It played on anyway. Madison entering the apartment. Madison picking the lock. Madison cracking the safe. Madison pulling folders out with a little victorious smile. When the video ended, the prosecutor asked, "Major Harper, is this footage accurate?" "Yes." "And did you give your sister permission to enter your home that day?" "No." "Did you give her access to your office, safe, or the documents she removed?" "No." There was no dramatic gasp. No one fainted, no theatrics, just silence from the jury box and a visible deflation from Madison's table. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The courthouse became a second workplace for me, a place where lunch breaks were replaced by testimony and evenings were spent reading transcripts instead of reports. Madison looked more strained with each hearing. Her hair lost its perfect gloss. Her clothes looked less curated. Her confidence eroded slowly, the way cliffs crumble not all at once but piece by piece until the shape is unrecognizable. Kyle stopped attending every session. When he did show up, he sat on the opposite side of the room from my parents. They didn't speak much. They barely acknowledged each other. Mom still cried through every hearing. Dad still glared at me like I had personally called the FBI just to spite him. The irony was almost comical. He was angry at me for refusing to commit a felony to protect Madison from the felony she committed. The cross-examinations got ugly. Madison's attorney tried suggesting I had exaggerated my job, that I was paranoid about security, that I set my sister up by keeping documents in a safe she didn't understand. The prosecutor dismantled that argument in 10 seconds. Major Harper's duties require her to handle classified materials. Her clearance is verified. Her storage protocols were authorized. These securities were part of an active operation. Regardless of family dynamics, no civilian is ever authorized to access them. Then came the worst moment, not legally, but emotionally. Madison took the stand. She didn't look at me as she spoke. She carefully avoided my side of the room the entire time. "I thought they were old papers," she said, voice shaking. I thought she wouldn't care. She never tells us anything. I didn't know." The prosecutor asked one question that cut straight through the performance. "Did you or did you not research lockpicking techniques for 13 consecutive days?" Madison's face flushed. Did you order a lockpick set?" "Yes." "Did you order a keypad override device?" "Yes." "And did you lie to your husband about where you got the documents?" "I didn't lie. I didn't tell him everything." The courtroom stayed painfully silent. Her lie collapsed exactly the way it had to. When closing arguments ended, the jury didn't deliberate for long. Their verdict came back crisp and unanimous guilty, on all counts. The judge didn't hold back. His sentencing speech was measured but firm. "You violated trust, not just within your family but against the laws of the United States. Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and reckless. The consequences reflect the seriousness of your choices." Madison cried openly. Mom shook uncontrollably. Dad stared straight ahead, face stone-like but eyes hollow. The sentence landed like a hammer: years in federal prison, mandatory restitution, fines stacked high enough to follow her for life. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was the exact weight of reality settling into place, solid, cold, unchanging. My sister wasn't innocent. She wasn't misunderstood. She wasn't unlucky. She had simply reached the end of a long road paved by everyone who told her she didn't have to face consequences. And the system finally disagreed. Walking out of the courthouse after the sentencing, I felt the sunlight hit my face in a way that didn't match anything happening around me. The air was warm, steady, almost pleasant. Meanwhile, my family stood on the courthouse steps looking like they'd just watched the world tilt off its axis. My mother was holding a tissue with both hands, the way people do when they're trying not to fall apart. My father stared at the traffic like it had personally offended him. My aunt whispered a quiet prayer. My uncle kept rubbing the back of his neck as if he could massage clarity into the situation. Kyle wasn't standing with them. He was in the parking lot alone, leaning on the trunk of his sedan, with the posture of a man questioning every life decision he'd ever made. I didn't approach him. I headed toward my own car, giving everyone enough space to suffocate in whatever version of reality they preferred. Mom reached me first. Her voice cracked. "Emily, she's not a criminal. She was convicted," I said, keeping my voice level. "She didn't mean to hurt you." "She didn't mean to get caught," I corrected. Dad stepped forward, face flushed. "You could have helped her. You could have told them you didn't want her punished." "That's not how federal law works." "Oh, don't start with that," he snapped. "You and your rules. You care more about your job than your sister." "No." "No," I said. "I care about not obstructing federal investigations." A passing attorney turned his head slightly, probably hearing enough to piece together the gist of the conversation. My father seemed to notice and lowered his voice, not out of shame, but out of pride. He hated looking foolish in public. Mom grabbed my arm. "She has 2 children. How will they manage?" "They'll manage with their father," I said. "He's stable. He works. He didn't commit a felony." "No." Her hand recoiled like I'd burned her. She didn't argue, just moved back toward the steps where my aunt wrapped an arm around her. Dad muttered something under his breath, the kind of complaint he usually saved for malfunctioning TV remotes and slightly cold coffee. Across the lot, Kyle finally pushed himself off the trunk and walked toward me. His face was drained, eyes red around the edges. "Emily," he said, voice quiet. "I didn't know she planned any of that, I swear." "I know." "No." "You believe me?" "Yes." I didn't sugarcoat or soften anything, but that doesn't change what she did. He nodded. "I'm filing for divorce. Papers are ready. I'll wait until she gets processed into the facility so they can serve her there." I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel pity. It was just another consequence landing exactly where it should. "She told me you treated her like a child," Kyle said. "But after everything came out, I realized she just needed everyone to treat her like one because she couldn't handle being responsible." That assessment was painfully accurate. I didn't respond. Kyle gave me a small nod before walking away, head down, steps heavy. By the time I got home, exhaustion draped over me like a weighted vest. I tossed my keys onto the counter, unbuttoned my blazer, and dropped it onto the couch. The apartment felt too quiet, just the distant hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of my own heartbeat. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I stood in the doorway and let the dimness settle. My phone buzzed. A message from my supervisor. Trial concluded. Administrative review closed. You're cleared to return to full duty. Resume classified access tomorrow. I exhaled slowly, more relief than victory. I needed my work. I needed the structure. I needed a world that didn't function on favoritism and emotional bailouts. The next morning, I walked back into the office with the kind of clarity that only comes after months of carrying something heavy. My badge scanned cleanly, my access restored. My colleagues greeted me with nods that carried no pity, just respect and the unspoken understanding that life hands out unfair lessons at random. The next few weeks moved with mechanical rhythm. Reports, briefings, surveillance logs, meetings with interagency partners, coffee that tasted like someone filtered it through gravel. It was familiar, grounding, and exactly what I needed. At home, things were different. My parents stopped calling as often. Not out of anger, more out of awkwardness they couldn't mask. When they did call, conversations were thin. My mother repeated the same line every time. We're just processing. My father kept conversations short, defaulting to weather updates or sports scores like he couldn't trust himself to talk about anything else. One evening, about 2 weeks after the sentencing, they finally visited. For the first time in years, they came to my apartment. They stood in the doorway like two people entering a museum they didn't feel smart enough to walk through. Dad looked at the reinforced locks. Mom studied the cameras. She wrung her hands. Your sister got assigned to the federal facility in West Virginia. I know. She'll be there a long time. Yes. Dad cleared his throat, probably for something dramatic, but what came out was surprisingly quiet. We didn't understand your life until all this happened. I leaned against the counter, waiting. He continued, slower. We didn't understand your job, or your rules, or why you keep things the way you keep them. That was always clear. Mom's voice shook. We didn't know how serious your work was. You didn't want to know. Silence stretched between us. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't angry, it was simply accurate. On their way out, Dad stopped at the threshold and said, I'm sorry. It wasn't specific, it wasn't detailed, but it was something. After they left, I sat on the couch and took a deep breath, feeling everything shift just slightly like the weight redistributed but didn't disappear. The following weekend, I checked the mailbox and found a letter from Madison. The envelope was thin, the handwriting familiar but messy. Inside, her words spilled across the page apologies, excuses, claims she never meant for things to go this far, requests for me to call the prosecutor, help with restitution, advocate on her behalf. Each sentence carried the same tone she'd used her entire life. Entitlement wrapped in guilt, hoping I'd cave. I folded the letter cleanly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it on the shelf with the others she would inevitably send. I didn't respond. Not because I enjoyed seeing her struggle, but because answering her now would simply reopen a role I'd spent decades being cast into, the protector, the fixer, the buffer between her and consequences. She didn't need another buffer. As the weeks passed, my life returned to something close to equilibrium. I trained a new analyst on our team. I completed a sting operation that shut down a laundering pipeline. I flew to DC for a briefing that ended with a commendation I didn't bother telling my parents about. There was no point. They weren't ready to understand it, and I didn't need them to. The truth was simple. Madison wasn't learning lessons because no one had ever let her sit long enough with the consequences to absorb them. Now she didn't have a choice. And for the first time, neither did anyone else. The first morning I walked into the skiff after everything had settled. The room greeted me with the familiar static hush of filtered air and the low, steady hum of machines doing exactly what they were designed to do. No drama, no emotions, just systems functioning with precision. I swiped my badge, entered my PIN, scanned my palm, and stepped through the door like nothing in my life had come apart in the past year. That's one thing the military teaches better than anything else. The world doesn't stop spinning because your family set itself on fire. I set my coffee down and powered up my workstation, watching encrypted networks spool up across the screens. My team filtered in one by one, tossing casual greetings my way. No one tiptoed, no pity, no hesitant glances, just coworkers who understood exactly how compartmentalization works, and that alone made it easier to breathe. Around noon, my supervisor called me into his office. He handed me a slim folder marked with a classification level I was cleared to see but not cleared to keep. "You led the intel push that flagged the Brazilian laundering pipeline," he said. "Your analysis helped identify the shell companies behind the bond transfers. State Department's thrilled. We're signing off on your commendation." I nodded, accepting the document. Not out of pride, just acknowledgement. He pushed a second sheet across the desk. "And there's more. You're officially recommended for promotion. It's been sitting in review, but the board moved quicker than expected." I skimmed the paper. Senior supervisory rank. Increased oversight, broader operations authority, bigger responsibilities. I felt a subtle warmth in my chest, not excitement exactly, but something steadier. Something earned. After the meeting, I headed back to my office. On my way, a young analyst stopped me, waving a stack of reports. "Major Harper, sorry, soon to be something higher. Harper, can you review this? I want to make sure I didn't screw up the wire patterns." His enthusiasm was genuine. It reminded me of myself before the world had sanded off all my edges. I looked over his work, made a few corrections, and handed it back. "Good instincts," I said. He grinned like I'd handed him a medal. The day moved quickly: briefings, encrypted calls, risk assessments. With every task, I felt something inside me settling into a position I should have occupied years ago. Not because of the accolades, not because of the promotion, but because this environment, this discipline had always fit me better than the home I grew up in. When I left the office that evening, the air outside was warm enough that I didn't need a jacket. I slipped into my car and headed home. The drive was peaceful, no alerts, no emergencies, no calls from investigators, just normalcy settling back into its rightful place. When I reached my apartment, a small stack of mail sat in my box. Bills, a catalog, a letter addressed in Madison's handwriting. I held it for a moment, not with dread, not with anger, just the kind of detached understanding you develop when you finally see someone clearly. I brought everything upstairs, set the mail on the counter, and stared at her envelope. The handwriting looked shaky this time. Messy. Rushed. Like she wrote it under pressure or after crying. I didn't open it. I slid it into the drawer with the others. A small stack, growing steadily. A pile of apologies, excuses, bargains, and requests, each one trying to pull me back into the cycle I had finally stepped out of. She wasn't learning from the silence. But she wasn't supposed to be learning from me. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who didn't care how charming she was or who had always cleaned up after her mistakes. Federal prison teaches faster than families do. I turned away from the drawer and grabbed a glass of water. As I drank, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Called the prison. She wants to see you, says she needs you." I stared at the message. There was no accusation this time. No guilt attached. Just a statement. I typed back, "I'm not visiting." 3 dots appeared. Then they vanished. Then nothing. For the next hour, I cleaned my apartment. Not because it needed it, but because it felt good to handle something that obeyed basic logic. Clean surface, clean mind. I vacuumed, wiped down counters, rearranged a bookshelf. Simple things. When I finally sat down on the couch, a quiet heaviness settled, not sadness, not regret, but clarity. Madison's downfall wasn't revenge. I hadn't orchestrated anything. I hadn't exposed her. She had exposed herself. Everything she lost, her marriage, her home, her freedom, was a direct result of choices she made while assuming the world would always bend the rules for her. My role in all of this wasn't the avenger. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the unemotional soldier my family accused me of being. I was simply someone who didn't break the rules she built her life around. Letting go wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a moral victory. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet. Steady. Almost anticlimactic. The next week, my promotion became official. The ceremony was small, practical, exactly the way I preferred it. A few coworkers clapped. Someone handed me a certificate. My supervisor shook my hand, and the moment passed. On my way out of the building, one of the newer officers stopped me skeptically. "Can I ask something?" he said. "How do you deal with all this? Work, family, the investigation, everything." I shrugged. "You just keep moving. That's all anyone can do." He nodded thoughtfully, like he expected a more philosophical answer. Driving home later, the city lights flickered across my windshield. My thoughts drifted not to Madison, not to my parents, but to the simple reality that my life was better when I stopped expecting people to understand it. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to a family who never cared to ask what I actually did, who preferred their own narrative over the truth. But the United States military understood my value. The Department of Defense understood my value. My work, my team, my clearance, those things reflected what I'd earned, not what I'd been born into. My worth wasn't tied to whether my family applauded it. And it sure as hell wasn't defined by whether my sister resented it. As I pulled into my parking space, the motion light clicked on above me. I shut the car door, feeling the warm night settle around me. For the first time in a long time, the silence felt like freedom instead of isolation. No revenge. No bitterness. No unresolved drama waiting to erupt. Just the clear, undeniable truth. Some families build you. Some families break you. And some families teach you exactly how strong you are the moment you stop trying to save them. I walked inside, locked the door, and exhaled quietly, steady, grounded, and finally done carrying weight that was never mine to hold.